the first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the extra pillow lying perfectly beside mine, as if someone had already decided the empty side of the bed no longer belonged to loneliness. My best friend had stayed until nearly midnight helping me pack every box, folding every shirt, wrapping every fragile memory with more care than I thought I deserved. Then, just before leaving, they paused at the bedroom door, looked at the bed with an unreadable expression, and quietly asked, "Which side is mine?" In that single moment, every wall I had spent years building around my heart began to crack. If stories about kindness, second chances, and the people who quietly change our lives mean something to you, we hope this story gives you a moment to reflect on your own journey and the people who have stood beside you when you needed them most. There are moments in life when everything changes without warning. Mine arrived disguised as cardboard boxes stacked against peeling apartment walls. I wasn't moving because I had found a better place or landed my dream job. I was moving because I couldn't afford to stay. Losing my position at work had started a chain reaction that slowly dismantled the life I had spent years trying to build. Bills piled up faster than hope. Friends who once promised they would always be around slowly became too busy to answer messages. Family lived too far away to help, and even if they hadn't, pride would never have allowed me to ask. Only one person kept showing up. Alex never arrived with dramatic speeches or impossible promises. Instead, they appeared carrying coffee, groceries, and quiet encouragement. Some days we barely spoke. Other days they listened while I poured out every fear I had hidden behind forced smiles. They never interrupted to tell me everything would be okay because they understood that sometimes honesty is more comforting than false certainty. Instead, they simply stayed. When moving day arrived, I expected to spend it alone. I had rented the smallest truck available, convinced I could manage everything myself. Before sunrise, however, Alex knocked on my apartment door wearing old jeans, worn-out sneakers, and the same calm smile that somehow made impossible things seem manageable. They never asked whether I needed help. They had already decided I did. Hour after hour we packed the scattered pieces of my life into faded boxes. Every object carried memories that felt heavier than its actual weight. Old photographs reminded me of happier years. Coffee mugs collected from forgotten vacations brought back dreams that had quietly disappeared. Books filled with handwritten notes reminded me of the hopeful person I used to be before disappointment became routine. Every time I slowed down, overwhelmed by another memory, Alex gently took the item, wrapped it carefully, and placed it into another box without judgment. By late afternoon exhaustion had settled into every muscle. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight entering the apartment for what felt like the last time. The rooms echoed differently now, stripped of furniture and laughter alike. Standing inside those empty walls, I realized I wasn't only leaving an apartment behind. I was leaving behind the version of myself who believed that hard work alone guaranteed a happy ending. The drive to my new place was quiet. It wasn't really a home. It was a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town with cracked windows and outdated furniture left behind by previous tenants. But it was affordable, and for someone rebuilding from nothing, affordability mattered more than comfort. Night arrived before we had finished unloading the truck. My entire body begged for sleep, yet dozens of unopened boxes covered the floor. I suggested we stop and continue another day. Alex simply shook their head and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 sandwiches they had somehow remembered to buy earlier that morning. While I had spent the entire day worrying about surviving the move, they had been quietly planning to make sure I didn't forget to eat. The hours slipped away unnoticed. We unpacked dishes, assembled shelves, connected lamps, and found places for books that no longer looked as hopeful as they once had. Every completed task made the apartment feel a little less unfamiliar. Every shared laugh chased away another piece of the loneliness waiting patiently in the corners. Sometime close to midnight, we finally reached the bedroom. There was only one bed. It was old, slightly uneven, and far smaller than the one I had left behind. Fresh sheets covered the mattress, though they were slightly wrinkled from my rushed attempt to make it earlier that day. I stood staring at it, suddenly aware that the move was over. Tomorrow would begin a completely different chapter. Alex quietly placed the final box beside the closet. They looked around the room one last time, smiled with quiet satisfaction, and then pointed toward the bed. "Which side is mine?" The question caught me completely off guard. For a brief second my mind searched for the obvious explanation. Maybe they were joking. Maybe exhaustion had finally reached both of us. But there was no teasing expression, no playful grin. There was only warmth, honesty, and something else I hadn't recognized before because I had spent so long believing I was unworthy of being chosen. Before I could answer, memories flooded my thoughts. Every difficult season of the past few years suddenly looked different. Every small act of kindness formed a pattern I had never noticed. The unexpected grocery deliveries. The endless encouragement before every job interview. The patient conversations long after midnight. The willingness to sacrifice weekends just to help me survive another week. None of it had been obligation. It had always been love expressed through quiet actions instead of dramatic words. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. Not because life had become easy overnight, but because for the first time in years I understood what true friendship looked like. It wasn't measured by celebrations during success. It revealed itself during failure, uncertainty, and heartbreak. It stayed when leaving would have been simpler. That night we talked until sunrise about fears we had hidden for years. Alex admitted they had wanted to tell me how they felt long before my life began falling apart but worried it would seem like they were taking advantage of my vulnerability. I confessed that I had convinced myself nobody could genuinely care about someone whose life seemed to be constantly falling apart. We laughed at how stubborn fear had been, quietly keeping two people apart who had already become each other's safest place. The months that followed were still difficult. Finding work took longer than expected. Money remained tight. There were evenings when dinner consisted of little more than soup and toast. Yet everything felt different because I no longer carried every burden alone. Hope returned in small, ordinary moments. Morning coffee shared before job interviews. Encouraging notes left beside the front door. Celebrating tiny victories that once would have gone unnoticed. Eventually I found another job. It wasn't glamorous, but it allowed me to begin rebuilding. One paycheck became another. Savings slowly returned. The apartment gradually transformed from a temporary shelter into a genuine home filled with laughter instead of uncertainty. Years later people often asked when our relationship truly began. They expected a romantic vacation, a grand confession, or some unforgettable celebration. We always smiled because the answer surprised everyone. It began inside a nearly empty apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes, aching muscles, and overwhelming uncertainty. It began with someone who chose to stay long after everyone else had left. It began with one simple question that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, take a quiet moment today to appreciate someone who has stood beside you through your hardest days. Sometimes the greatest expressions of love are the quietest ones, and they deserve to be remembered. Before this story ends, we'd love to know, who is the person who never gave up on you when life became difficult? Sharing their story may remind someone else that kindness still exists in the world. Life rarely gives us perfect timing. It gives us imperfect moments where ordinary people make extraordinary choices. My best friend didn't rescue me with wealth, impossible solutions, or miraculous opportunities. They rescued me with patience, loyalty, compassion, and the courage to remain when staying required sacrifice. Looking back now, I realize the most unforgettable question I have ever been asked wasn't about dreams, careers, or success. It was a quiet question spoken beside a simple bed after a long day of packing, proving that sometimes home isn't the place you move into. Home is the person who lovingly asks which side belongs to them, promising without another word that you will never have to face tomorrow alone.